So now I invite the speakers to the front so that we can have a panel discussion. But first off, I would like to know how many people here are destination managers or like working in DMOs and all that? And the others, where are you coming from? As consultants, as municipal government? What else do we have here? Tour operator? Project manager? Okay. Okay. Well, let me just stand because I'm also small and I think it's much better that I stand. Anyway, yeah, so yeah, thank you very much for your presentations. That was very that was very enlightening to hear. But I guess one of the first questions that I think that keeps coming back, and I think has not just only been mentioned in this panel, but is a recurring question that has been a recurring topic over and over. It's with working with the stakeholders, working with destination stakeholders. And I think for climate adaptation and mitigation, I think this is one area where it has been, if not the toughest, one of the toughest topics to get communities involved, to get more people involved, and especially because it sounds so overwhelming for a lot of communities that you work with. So maybe from your experience and with your expertise as well, you know, like what was your experience? What were the challenges that you experienced, and how did you actually move forward with that? Maybe we can start with you all.
Oh. No, it's really good. I'm sitting here and not my colleague Wolfgang, who would know it all. Yeah. So, no, but it's. I think I totally agree. That's the key thing, because if you don't manage to get through to the stakeholders, there will be no success. And I think our project, or this project, was like a mix of top-down, bottom-up. So it was invented, let's say, on the top, on the regional scale, but it always had the intention to ignite a bottom-up process. So that funding and general idea came from up there, but then it was basically pushed to the, let's say, to the lowest level that made sense for the different steps. And I think it's really then you need key actors and then multiplicators. But I think this is, in tourism, we are used to work together. So the let's say the regional DMO is used to work together with the local and the micro-regional ones. So they already had their counterparts there. So I think within tourism it was not so hard to involve the stakeholders. But as we also wanted to get cross-sectoral, I think there was different success. So it really depended on how well in a, let's say, small-scale destination they were already used to work together. But as far as I know, in this first project phase was, I think, 14 or 15 months. They already succeeded quite well into engaging also cross-sectoral ones. It could always be more, but it worked. But really, it worked because this bottom-up worked. So tourism at the bottom spread out to their partners, or if there were not partners, to the people they wanted to talk about. And in the end, also with really not trying to achieve too much too fast, I think was also important. So that they first talked and listened, and then basically got into the process of achieving something.
I want to get back to the not achieving everything too fast, but going slowly. But I will come back to that later, and I'll give the floor to Vanessa first.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thanks for the question. It's very, very important one, and actually I believe it is really necessary to have a problem for a bottom-up approach, and this is really necessary. We need to tackle a problem, and at Whidbey and Camino Islands, for example, there was this anger amongst the community members, this problem of over-tourism, the destruction of the natural places and all of that, and then needed change to happen, because like even Whitby Camino Islands tourism was close to be closed because like all of these like big fights and all of that, and yeah, by taking the step, which for them was the right step to follow the regenerative and transformative approach, they really tackled the root cause of the problem, and this whole process was actually with 20 community members from various organizations, and that all of them co-created this problem. And there was many sessions, like you saw in the messy middle, like it was really a roller coaster, and they found these shared values and this vision and the goals, and this created ownership. And by that, so this was the solution in that case.
Thank you very much. And how about you, Joe? Like, what was the experience in?
Yeah, I mean, my sense is that that the general public sees the agencies, the government agencies and private sector companies as having all the money and the lingo and the language of climate change and the time and the opportunity to go and discuss this at length. A lot of them feel kind of left out and probably awkward about what they're to do themselves a lot of them. So I think that kind of public engagement is quite difficult oftentimes. I think they come to the room thinking, sure, all these other people are paid to be here, and you know, I'm giving my time voluntarily to do this, and I'm not sure that anything will come out of it. So I think there's probably quite a groundswell of that, and I suppose we as destinations, I suppose, have to be conscious as well that while we might feel that we're getting all our ducks lined up, the issue is still that I mean, our own research has sort of shown that 90% of people haven't a clue what climate change is about and what actions they're about to take. So there's an enormous dearth of information, and I suppose maybe a creeping cynicism about where all of this might be going. That'll be my sense, that it's not at all clear. So it's a vulnerable enough time when meeting with groups and to genuinely engage with them about what's to happen in their own community, because I think we can use a lot of quite nice language and so on, and put up a lot of slides, but I think that they probably roll their eyes at us much of the time and think, sure, he's paid to be there, which I think it's a kind of quite a big thing, you know.
Yeah.
It's really interesting what you say, and I'm sure it's true. I also think that in many instances there are cases where climate mitigation and adaptation also have tangible benefits for people in local communities. You know, the example that I used of Barbados, of conserving the reefs and the beaches, for the tourists, they also have direct impacts and positive impacts for the people living on the coast. Marine protected areas, again, they are there for conservation purposes, but people living there, people fishing nearby, can also see in a longer term the benefit of getting more fish stocks, and the recovering environment. So while it's true, I think, I think we need to point out the benefits to people in their local communities, and while I also think that it's true that the language we use and the approach we take can seem distant and slightly overbearing, I also think that we shouldn't underestimate people's ability to understand what is happening in the world and what the future holds, because these are very real issues, and they're becoming more and more clear. I mean, it was impossible to go through the summer without thinking about climate change almost every single day. So we need to use this opportunity. It's a really critical time. We're running out of time, and if we can't change people's minds now, then what are we doing? Yeah. Because it's sort of now or never, really.
Would it be possible that this is where it's a little bit more of a top-down initiative as well, or kind of like it starts in the top-down because there's no more time and we need to take actions. Yeah. But then at the same time, and especially with regeneration and with nature regeneration, it takes time, right? But with the climate urgency or the climate action urgency that we are facing at the moment, how do you basically drive destinations, drive governments into making those decisions urgently? And considering that a lot of people think of mitigation and adaptation also as very capital and investment intensive. And yeah, so like from your experience working with this, like what would you tell destinations that were in not a more alarming, in not a more alarming tone, although we kind of like need it now anyway. And maybe Vanessa, you can start, because I think from your perspective, it was very, it was more bottom up, I would say. Like it was coming from the anger of people, like from the over tourism, and then eventually going into the climate adaptation. So how did that kind of turned out for the destination?
Yeah. Also, thanks for this question. I believe it is really essential to come from both ways. Where it starts, it's a chicken and egg. In general, your question, what helps from a top-down perspective? I definitely do not believe that forcing is something that's successful. I think it is very helpful if the structures, and it is necessary actually, that the structures that are enabling for this bottom-up approach and also supporting that there is a business case for these climate solutions and in general environmental regenerative solutions. This is what's really important from on policy level. And yeah, and on that, I mean, you ask many questions.
Yeah. Sorry, there's so many things running in my head, but like, we also have a very limited time. But yeah, thank you. Yes.
But maybe follow up on this, because I think it's what you said, the hen and egg, so where it comes from. But I think then it's important that you speak eye to eye, and I think there is a tendency sometimes from, I think also from us consultants, researchers, public organizations, that we are a bit patronizing, and it's, if the talk is, let's say, top down, I think that's like the worst. And I think what I said, you don't do things too much too fast. I think maybe, the time frames we are talking about is not, it doesn't take forever to convince people and to be trustful and to build a common ground where you discuss eye to eye. But I think this is really needed, and I think it's not that it takes many days, but I think you really have to be careful and think this process through. So when you send out the communication about that you want to engage them into a process where you really want to listen to them, I think this is then the language thing. You have to cut the bullshit and talk their language. And it's actually, I think it's also, it's actually, we have a common language. I think also sometimes in this project world we tend to adapt to this funding language,
to get the funding.
And there really is translation needed, and maybe also your readjustment of perspective. But I think it's also helpful to take that step. So I think it's more like a state of mind to be able to listen and to not be the one who knows it all and tells what should happen, but to say, I'm here, or we are here, we know where we want to go, like on the long run, but we don't know how, and we can only do it together. And this is the common ground where we start discussing.
Maybe, Joe, you can share a little bit, because I'm also interested how you got the beet extracting company to be on your project as well. Like, how did that start? Like,
under the EU Life, they got significant funding to do some of the regeneration work. So they re-wet the grounds and all of that. And so they were able to deploy the people who were doing the harvesting to go back and to do the replacement. So they got a lot out of it. What we're asking them now to do is to do this translational work and to show that their journey of change is kind of impactful for the world. But what they're interested in is now putting up wind farms and stuff, and they said we're not interested in the public engagement. So they have ruled themselves out of any of the work that we're doing, unfortunately, because they said, well, we're engineers, we're not interested in public engagement. So they have already said that they are going to go in a different direction. So they've come with this a little bit of the way they're going to give the site, but they're not going to do any if they follow up. We thought they could tell a story there, but they're not going to.
That's quite unfortunate, but it would have been an interesting. It would have been an interesting case as well, you know, like a big company going into regeneration. But maybe.
Yeah, just some thoughts. I mean, I also think it's a very careful balance. I mean, our project did look at sort of top-down structures. We mainly spoke to government people, and it was mainly policy oriented. But no one likes a government person who's from somewhere else to walk in and demand that they do something else. And I think there's also when governments or when we launch kind of consultative processes, I think there's often among stakeholders a sort of a cynicism that the outcome has already been decided before the process begins. So I think it's really important, as all said to you, to approach consultation with a genuinely open mind, to genuinely listen, to cut out all the jargon, and to meet people from their own concerns and offer, offer them incentives and outline the kind of the positive future that a local place can envisage and people can really benefit from.
Thank you very much. So I guess one of the questions I've always been asking as well is making things accessible to people who lack the technical expertise, who lack the technical knowledge. And it seems like from the presentations, we've all seen that there's a lot of technical expertise input into this one. And also with how we're getting the funding as well. It needs a lot of technical inputs. But for destinations who actually don't have the funding or are looking for the funding, how do we make this exercise a bit more accessible to them? And especially, like I'm coming also from the Philippines, and my experience from the Philippines, where we're scouring for consultants, and it's either we don't have the money, they're too expensive, or they have way too many clients as well. So what would your take be on this? Maybe we can start with Joe.
I suppose, I think there's this technical expertise there and no shortage of it. I think that's maybe not the thing. I mean, a lot of them, sometimes they're climbing over each other in terms of maybe the agencies find it difficult to cooperate. Various companies have their own policies and things, so we're finding it difficult enough to get them all to, while they all agree, they all have their own, I suppose, specific agenda that they would wish to advance. I suppose what some of the earlier speeches were about today was that a collective ecosystem has to be developed, and that's not just within the community, but is within destination managers and within agencies and government departments and others. That's quite a difficult community to harness as well. So as getting them all to work, and I mean it's a bit of a shame in a way. I know in my own country we have lots of people working on climate action, but they kind of have their own space and their own way, and they probably would find it hard to cooperate on a single project for that reason.
Maybe, but sure, no, thinking out loud. But I think what is really crucial, or what could be a success factor, is I think this question of ownership. And I cannot really tell for the Philippines, but I think in the EU, I think if you're creative and, let's say, persistent enough, I think there is funding to be found. So I think it's not lying there to pick up, but I think eventually it's there. And I think it's also from what we learned, and also from what I heard also from talking at least in the EU context, I really think this it could be really a great role for destination management organization and for destination managers to take over this role of coordinator of climate change adaptation and mitigation in destinations, because we are used to work with lots of people, lots of stakeholders. We are used to cross-sectoral, we are used to cross-level. And I also know the cases where really, but it's often really down to the personal level. So you need first this person who wants to go for it, and you need, let's say, an organizational frame that will support this person to go for it. So I think it's quite a fragile, from my perspective, there is a big possibility, but it's quite fragile and it might not work in every environment. But I think then it's really this ownership and persistence and creativity to go for it. And I think then really on this personal level of people who sit here, it can really you can make a big impact with your job.
And that, sorry. Just to comment a little bit on what you were saying, that's what we've also been advocating in Green Destinations, that destination managers, we know that they don't have a lot of regulatory or like enforcement role. But what we always say is that they are facilitators, as you said, like they are facilitators of connecting all these departments together, working together. So that's how we also see them. And yeah, it's not always the case that the DMO sees themselves as that. And so I think for us, it's also communicating and educating them and letting them know that they do have the power to be able to facilitate that. So.
Yeah, sorry, I was just going to make a quick point as well. Is that's I think also it's another risk of an approach being always top down, because it's the multinational organizations and it's the countries that have the money that then are taking the decisions about where that funding is going from, and so then there can be a gap of getting that, getting that kind of locally based movement and getting funding support for those stakeholders and locally based movements. So making it come from the ground up. But as you say, with the right structures in place, with the right motivation, and with contact to the right people, then there is funding available. There is funding around. It's just accessing it. But stakeholders really need that intermediary, like you're saying.
Yeah, I also think, additional to what has been said, it is a very place-based approach, because at Whidbey and Camino Islands they have this accommodation tax where they can draw from, and they draw from. It's also not something that's like self-evident, because they put the value on it, and that's the second point that I also would like to see make. Climate mitigation and adaptation, sustainability, all of that, it is not the right way to see it in a silo, that it's an additional cost. It is part of all of that, because we need the nature. We heard that today for our life, for tourism, for the economy, and we also know, like, when there's an emergency, we have the money just right there. It is a way like how we put our values, and I know it is one of the biggest challenges for all destinations and also for all of us, but it is also something to be aware of, I believe.
Thank you very much. I think one of the biggest realizations also from today, I mean, not really realization, but more of reinforcing that we really need nature, and that, like, at the end of the day, that's what we need. That's where we are, like that's where we source everything from, whether it's tourism or transportation or manufacturing. We all depend on the planet that we live in. I have a lot more questions, but I think we have a really good selection of audiences here, like a variety of audiences that would really have a lot of questions for our presenters today. So I would like to open the floor to the audience for more questions, rather than me just asking very complicated, way too many things going on in my mind. So maybe that will be something that will be much interesting from your perspective as well. So yeah, anyone who wants to have any questions? Or anyone who wants to ask any questions? Sorry. No? Are you serious? Really? Yes, please. Thank you.
People are shy.
Well, this is a very general question, so actually just to all of you. And I have noticed in some discussions that there are certain groups of people who think that the adaptation is not climate mitigation, that the focus should be in the mitigation instead of accepting that the climate change is happening and focusing on adaptation, which is odd. But I would just like to hear your thoughts. That have you had this kind of controversial kind of remarks or questions that is the climate adaptation, like, do you feel that it's understood, that it's inevitable, that we have to adapt to the change?
Can I start with that one?
Let's go ahead.
From a Caribbean perspective, the focus at the moment is very much on adaptation, because in terms of global emissions of carbon dioxide, they really contribute a small amount, and yet the impacts are felt much more heavily in the Caribbean than they are elsewhere, especially in the small island developing states. They're extremely vulnerable. So they are also focused on mitigation. They are also looking at renewable energy and ways to reduce energy costs, and looking at electric vehicles and other alternative forms of transport. But the focus there has to be on climate adaptation, because they're already seeing the impacts. And for disaster management, for example, they really need to put the plans in place now in order to be prepared for what's happening now. It's not possible to just wait another 10 years and see how bad it will get. So, I mean, in that region, it's very clear. There's a two-pronged approach. One is mitigation and one is adaptation, and they need to focus at the moment on adaptation. There are some differences because, for example, we looked at Trinidad and Tobago, which is an oil and gas nation, and it's less exposed. It's just below the hurricane belt, so it's different in the different nations. But still, overall, I would say that there's a focus on adaptation, and rightly so. So it depends on the country, I think.
I think our project is very much about the mitigation. It's about driving behaviour change. So we're asking people to adopt behaviours that will, I suppose, reduce their impact. And oftentimes people will be looking about what should I eat in the future? How should I travel? How should I heat my home? All of that. So we're hoping that this future showcase will give people practical steps and let them see what they might do. So largely we haven't given up the ghost yet. Maybe we haven't been impacted as much in that, so we're not having to adapt maybe that much yet. So really the agenda is quite positive in terms of that there's still a lot of steps we can take to mitigate what's coming about.
Yeah, it's necessary to do both. Yeah, of course we need to adapt. This comes naturally. Humans are really good in adapting, actually. And at the same time, mitigates that it's becoming worse. And one example is I worked with Salvador, a city in Brazil, and they actually had this project of climate adaptation through tourism, but we really integrated mitigation, social aspects, all areas, economic, environmental, in this adaptation plan. So it really goes hand in hand, and sometimes it is maybe clear in a box, but I see it more that it really is very integrated.
Yeah, the same. I also think it's not an either or. I think if you come into that line of discussion, I always get a little bit irritated, because I think it's also not a choice actually that you have. I think we have to do both, but I also think talking about regional destination management organizations and like tourism destinations, I think they are better for managing the adaptation part, because I think the mitigation part is, tourism plays its role, but I think many things that are decided there, they I mean, they are decided on a national or global or whatever level. So I think when you think in concrete measures, I think probably destination management organizations can make a bigger impact with the adaptation, is my feeling. Because also, like case of Germany, the impact of tourism that we have on climate, it's from the outbound tourism. And so it's maybe nice if a destination management organization in Germany manages to get a little bit more people from the car to the train. But I think that's really, I mean, all the small bits count, but I think what would be more successful if they have a great product that adapts to climate change, which attracts more tourists and eventually brings maybe more domestic tourism, whereas less flying or less short-term flying at least. I think we can make the bigger impact there.
Yeah, actually, that's one of the things that we have also been telling the destinations, you know, like actually you can start demarketing your long haul. That's already a form of mitigation. You know, not always about being capital intensive, not always about the infrastructure that works. So yeah, I'm glad that you brought that up as well. Come on, guys. Someone should have some questions.
It's actually a question that kind of comes to your last answers, because like thinking now about adaptation and mitigation and having the example from the Caribbean as well as Germany, I was just thinking that it's actually kind of a paradox that a country where it's mostly coming from outbound tourism, the CO2 footprint, has much more power probably to focus also on mitigation, or at least a combination, whereas on the Caribbean islands, it's mainly the inbound tourism harming the country, and everything that you can do is adapt. So, I mean, if you put it now really in that extreme way, what would be the solution to make a change? I mean, it's a simple question.
Yeah. How long do you want to stay?
Well, I know where you have to be on Monday. So.
Tough questions in this panel, huh?
Yeah, I think if you think this through, if like for the carbon, it would be good if the Germans don't fly at all, and then but then they don't end up in the Caribbean, and there will be nobody there. So we have a problem with. I mean, maybe there's also there is no harmful impact, but there is also no good impact as well. So I think for the planet, it would probably for sure be the best if we don't travel at all.
Yeah.
But I think we agree that's not the solution. So,
yeah. Local communities who are absolutely dependent on tourism income. Yeah, this is a paradox, and I guess the only solution is finding green ways of flying. For destinations like the Caribbean, because they are, you know, you can't get there any other way, except by boat. But that's
but it's
not going to
basically
be much tourism.
all island destinations.
All island destinations. Yeah.
I mean, we have a conflict in that if you have a pristine, regenerating peatland setting that's getting on just fine, if it was regenerated, why would you bring 250,000 humans to it and for them to walk all over it and to get in the way of it? So there's always this sort of challenge about the development of a kind of a tourism product, really a human-centered product, and at the same time to be talking about regeneration. And so we will be treading that difficult path. Why would you fly people internationally in to see a sustainability attraction?
And at the same time, we live in a very globalized world that we can't suddenly step back from. I mean, there are more interactions in every sphere. It's not just tourism. It's, you know, it's every sphere of human development, essentially. You know, we've got goods and services crisscrossing the planet constantly. Tourism is just one aspect of that. And that's a much wider economic question, isn't it, of kind of our economic system, rather than just looking at tourism, I suppose.
We have about 2 minutes left before we end the panel.
Good question. So,
there are no. I can understand, mitigation and adaptation. They're very complex, not really, as I said earlier, overwhelming. But we have one. I think we have time for one more question. Because if there's none, then I'm going to ask the last question. Okay, then I will ask the last question. For you guys, say a destination really wants to get into mitigation and adaptation policies. They don't know where to begin. What would be their first step?
For a destination manager?
Yeah, for a destination manager.
I think the first step is to look up who in their region and who in their area is working on climate change. Now, whether that's, ideally locally, regionally, nationally, in every country now, people are working on climate change. So make links with those, have conversations with them, and also think about what other sectors you might be able to work with to have greater impact. So whether that's sort of local agriculture, local food producers, whether that's local nature reserves, whether that's local biodiversity groups, for example. Who can you work with, who can give you information, and that you can collaborate on projects to work together, and how can you access kind of further up the scale on and feed into and gain from and get information from kind of local, regional and national sort of strategies that are focused on climate change and other environmental issues.
Anyone?
I would say just choose a small project and have an early win. Then I think the talk isn't needed so much because it's a demonstration. And
it also makes it not necessarily smaller, but it makes it more possible.
Yeah.
To have an immediate outcome, yeah, and not make it very overwhelming. For one last words, or?
Yeah. On one side, to see what's already existing, because there is existing already a lot, and a lot of the initiatives are existing in silos, and then to maybe bring them to see what's needed and to bring them together, and by that also cross-fertilize, and by that also be aware of what is actually the problem and what is the solution, because all the solution is always place-based, and there's and to develop that for this destination basically, and by that mitigation adaptation will happen to develop this theory of change basically. Yeah, I also believe it's to bring it to a bigger level than climate mitigation adaptation. It is because the whole environment is related to all of that. Yeah. And then if you need that for the reporting or whatever, you can fill out your whatever you need to fill out. Yeah.
Thank you.
Maybe just briefly, if you have no idea at all, I would say Google for advice, because I think there are really great handbooks and best practice examples around. So I think you would probably end up, I don't know, with some handbooks, reports, I don't know, if by Travel Foundation or I don't know, the sustainability handbook of ETC, probably if they end up at your site and find the tools. And I think also looking for conferences and networks, because I mean now all the conferences, you find all the findings there, you find the recordings, so you can have a quick look at a 15-minute presentation and you find it there, and then I would suggest go to one of these places to exchange and then bring it home, make a plan and convince your surroundings.
On that note, thank you very much. I hope that this panel was as valuable for you guys as it was for me. I learned a lot. That's why a lot of things were going in my head. But yeah, I know it's a very tough topic to talk about, to address. But I hope that somehow we got to bring out solutions that of where we can start with for climate mitigation and adaptation in destinations. So once again, thank you very much. Thank you to our panelists. Thank you, everyone. And yeah.